Hello and welcome to month 2 of level C1, C2. I'm going to be speaking more or less in my normal voice because at this level you should be able to understand me. If you don't, you should practice your listening a little bit more. And also you can listen to the video as many times as you like. What else? I also want to mention that you can decrease, increase the speed. You can use the subtitles if you feel you need them. And we have a lot of information to get through this month. Vocabulary, grammar first, then vocabulary, business English, and some Cambridge material as well. You can watch the video in stages. You can review the vocabulary first, for example, and then, or whichever way you like, and you can repeat it as many times as you want. You have a whole month to repeat and review, and you can do it whichever way suits you best. The PDF corresponds to the video, so you can follow the PDF. You can use it for studying later. You can use it to create a cheat sheet, chuleta, for notes that you want to, the vocabulary, the structures that you want to remember. So, without further ado, let's move on, and we're going to begin with some grammar points. I'm working on the assumption that you will already know some of this grammar. So if you find that you need to brush up on the basics, to review more basic vocab or grammar, you can go back to, for example, the B2 and review the grammar section on that. And that can help because, sometimes we're missing some things or we haven't practiced it. So it might be a good idea to do that. So the first point in the grammar will be the conditionals. Just to review quickly the different conditionals that we have. 0 we don't really practice because it's kind of a basic one. Some general truths: if you heat water it boils, for example. If you walk fast you sweat, for example. First conditional, we're speaking about the future. If it rains I will stay home, or I will stay home if it rains. So we're using present plus future with will. Speaking about the second conditional, it's in the present, but we're using the past. Don't you love English? So if I had money, I would travel. So past plus would. I would travel if I had money. We generally, in the verb to be, we generally use were. If I were rich, I would buy, for example. The third conditional, speaking about the past, we use the past perfect. If I had known, I would have helped. Okay, so, or I would have helped if I had known. And then in speaking every day, we usually mix the conditionals, If I had studied, past conditional, I would have a better job now, present conditional. So there's a little quiz here to test it. If you want to come to the document later and check it or pause the video, you can do that. Okay. Speaking about inversions for emphasis. This is level C1 and C2. So sometimes we change the order of our sentences in order to emphasize something. If we want to emphasize, be more dramatic or formal, we can do this. Some ways to do it, for example, using these more negative verbs. Rarely have I seen such a beautiful sunset. Seldom do I go there, for example. Not only, but also. For example, not only do I drink coffee, but I also drink tea. We're putting the auxiliary in there. Some more examples. Never have I seen such a beautiful view. Rarely do we get a chance to rest. Not only did he forget my birthday, but he also ignored my calls. No sooner had I sat down than the phone rang. So it's useful to try to remember some of these to use and also to study them a little bit so that if you see them, you recognize them. Okay. So let's go into the specifics a little bit more, using only after, or only when, or only if, or only by. Only after the meeting did I realize. So we're using the auxiliary there to invert. Only when I arrived home did I remember. Okay. Conditionals without if. So you don't just have the traditional structure of the conditionals. You can practice conditionals in another way. For example, if I had known, you can say had I known. So you're dropping the if and you're inverting the had I. Were I you if I were you? Now, to be honest, I would never say this, but it is a grammatical structure and you can say it. If I were you can be changed to were I you. Should you need help? This is common enough. If you need help. So this would be maybe a more formal way of speaking. If you need help, let me know. Should you need more information, let me know. So again, here you can practice a little bit with this quiz. Modals of deduction. So some modal verbs we use to deduce something, to make a guess at what's happening. In the present, for example, you could say he's sleeping on the street, he must be homeless. To change to the past, you would say he was sleeping on the street, he must have been homeless. So must plus have plus participle. So a lot of the modal verbs in the past use this structure. Must, could, would, should, might, may, can't in speaking about as something that's impossible. So today I must go, or for example, today he must be homeless, yesterday he must have been. He might be, he might have been. Maybe, may have been. Should be, should have been. Okay, so again here you have a little exercise to practice a little bit with the answers. Again, it's like the third conditional, you know. The third conditional, we use the structure would have gone. The past modals are the same. Might have gone, may have gone. Okay? Reported speech. It's useful to know at this level how to report speech because we often, for example, tell stories in the past or report something that people said or did in the past. And it's something that can be quite difficult unless you practice it. So there are some rules that you can review to help you do this well. And we're going to review them. Okay. One of the things is to change the pronoun according to the subject. Obviously, if he said, I like pizza, to report that, you would say he said he liked pizza. Okay. In relation to tenses, if you're speaking in the present simple, if you're changing present simple to the past simple, you would say, for example, I eat breakfast. He said he ate breakfast. Okay. If you are reporting from the present continuous, you change to the past continuous. I am reading changes to, she said she was reading. Present perfect changes to past perfect. I have finished changes to, he said he had finished. So you're basically just going back one tense. No? Past simple changes to past perfect. For example, I bought a phone changes to, she said she had bought a phone. So you're just going back one tense each time. When we're speaking about the future with will, we change it to would. I will call you. He said he would call me. Okay. Future was going to, for example, he is going to call you. He said he was going to call you. So basically you're changing the verb is to was. Okay. There are some things, I'm going to erase that because I think it's just confusing. There are some times that you don't need to change. For example, the mountain is always going to be the same mountain. Okay, the mountain is really high. She said that the mountain is really high. So you could say was or is in these cases. Okay. You also need to be careful that you're changing the reference, the time reference. If it's initially, if they say, I'm tired today, you could say, she said she was tired that day. Depends. If you're speaking in the same day, you could say, she said that she was tired today. So just to be aware. You might need to change. In relation to questions, with two types of questions, In this case, we're talking about two types of questions. The ones that have yes or no questions, we use if, or you can use whether, sorry. Are you coming? She asked if I was coming. So you're changing the present to the past. And also changing the order back because it's no longer a question, you know. So it's no longer an inversion. She asked whether I was coming, you can also say. If it's open questions, you keep the question word and change the order. And also the tense. Where do you live changes to he asked me where I lived. What do you do for a living? He asked me what I did for a living. We don't have the auxiliary and we change the order. Okay, in relation to imperatives, we just use to plus the infinitive. For example, close the door. He told me to close the door. And then the negative infinitive, don't be late. He told me not to be late. Okay, and then with negative statements, I can't come. He said he couldn't come. Okay, so then here's like a summary of the things and some examples that can help, and then a little quiz that you can use to check your learning. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay, so you can practice with this little quiz here. Moving on to our next topic. This is specifically for C2 level. If you're going for the C1, you can review this, but it's not necessary to study it in depth yet. Cleft sentences we use to emphasize a specific part of a sentence. For example, a regular sentence, John broke the glass. To be more specific, we could say it was John who broke the glass. I love traveling the most. What I love most is traveling. So you can see that we're emphasizing here. Little quiz. I need a good night's sleep. What I need is. Maria suggested the idea. It is Maria who suggested the idea. It was Maria, better in this case because it was in the past. And the reason I called was that I needed your guidance, or because I needed your guidance. Okay? So just to keep that in mind. Speaking related to modals in the past, at C2 levels, you should be aware of some nuances, matices, some nuances when you're using the modals, like how to use them in slightly different ways to slightly change the meaning, you know. So some examples here. I'm sure he forgot. You could say he must have forgotten. She might have called. It's possible. You should have told me. You didn't tell me, but that was a mistake, you know. So some more examples here. He couldn't have, he can't have, impossibility. We did mention these before. You should have told me the truth. I would have gone if I had known. I could have won if I had trained harder. So we did mention these before when we were speaking about modals in the past, but just be aware that at C2 level you should be able to use them appropriately to slightly change the meaning or the emphasis, you know. Here we have some more examples. They must have realized the risk. You could have called. You didn't. We needn't have rushed. It wasn't necessary. Okay. You can try this little quiz to check if you know how to do this well enough. Okay. I'm going to move on. Okay, again, at C2 level, at C1 level, you can review it using the subjunctive and formal structures more. So this is quite formal. It's useful to know in terms of writing reports or speaking in meetings or sending emails. Some examples include, I suggest that he go. It's essential that she be informed. You can say it's essential that she is informed. Were he to arrive early, we would start sooner, so we mentioned this before. If he were to arrive early, would be the regular conditional here, but were he to, it's more formal. Okay, so again, here's an exercise. You can use it to practice this and maybe learn some new structures. And the answers are below. Okay, again, at C2 level, it's important that you know discourse markers and connectors very well and use them when you're speaking. Okay, just to check that you know these connectors. However, that instead of but, although, even though, and on the other hand. Be careful with on the other hand. We only use this when we're contrasting. We don't use this, for example, to move from one topic to another. Okay, so if you're doing that, you need to find another expression. For example, moreover, in addition, also. Okay, so for example, on one hand, I like to exercise. On the other hand, I don't like to get up early to do it, for example. Addition, furthermore, moreover, in addition. So as I said before, you can use this instead of on the other hand if you're using on the other hand incorrectly. Speaking about cause and effect, therefore, por lo tanto, or as a result, or consequently, and then using connectors in relation to time or sequence, first, then, subsequently, and finally. So there's a little quiz that you can check your knowledge of the connectors. So that's the end of the grammar. Let's move on to vocabulary for C1 and C2. In this section, we have a lot of expressions, phrasal verbs, verbs, adjectives, connectors, and things that we can use to talk about or write about specific topics. The first topic is the environment. Some advanced verbs that we can use here, some of them probably you know, or they seem easy. To preserve. We need to preserve our forests, we need to conserve our resources, to restore is to bring back. It's a good idea to restore the tradition of reusing bags. To degrade is to make something worse. We are degrading the planet with our current actions. To pollute the atmosphere, to emit is to release. We emit toxins into the air. Mitigate is to help to solve problems or make them less serious. To mitigate disasters. To exacerbate is to make bigger. So we are exacerbating the problem by creating more plastic products. To adapt, we know, and we need to adapt to our environment. To offset is to try to neutralize or balance the effect. For example, when we fly, we can offset our carbon footprint by paying the airline to do it, for example. To jeopardize is to put at risk. We're jeopardizing our future if we continue to harm the environment. To sustain something is to keep it the same way. We need to be more sustainable in the way that we are consuming things, and to regulate. So the government is in charge of regulating the environmental issues, like plastic bags, for example. Some adjectives that could be useful for this topic include sustainable, sustainable measures, biodegradable, using products that are biodegradable, renewable energy, non-renewable energy. The Earth ecosystem is very fragile. The oceans are not in pristine condition anymore. There are a lot of endangered species. We are doing irreversible damage. It's an ecological disaster. We should try to be carbon neutral. And the Earth can be resilient if we try to reverse the damage. And the rivers are contaminated, for example. Those just to give you examples of how you could use them. Some useful phrasal verbs for this topic. To cut down is to reduce. To cut out is to stop. So we should cut down on our use of plastic. We should phase out plastic is to gradually stop using it. For example, non-renewable energy gives off toxic substances and is toxic for the environment. To clean up is to clean something. To run out of is to no longer have. So I have run out of bread. I don't have any bread, for example. We are running out of resources. To bring about is to make something happen. So we should bring about change by lobbying the government to make the changes. To set aside is to save for later. We should set aside money for a rainy day, for a difficult situation. To look after is to care for. We need to look after the environment, so they can be useful for speaking about this topic. The next topic that we can talk about today is business and financial terminology. So we're going to review some vocabulary that is useful in relation to this topic. To leverage is to use something for your advantage. So she leveraged her property ownership to get another mortgage. To optimize is to make something as effective as possible. For example, we need to optimize our resources to reduce our costs. Diversify is going different directions with something, add variety. It's a good idea to diversify your investments so you don't lose everything at once if they go wrong. Consolidate is to put together. To consolidate a loan is to take various loans and put them into one loan, for example. To liquidate is to sell assets to get cash. Invest, it's a good idea to invest in Bitcoin, for example. And to speculate is to take some financial risks. To depreciate is when something loses value. For example, the car depreciates every year. To underwrite something is to guarantee in terms of finance or insurance. So, for example, a job in insurance could be as an underwriter. This is your job, to guarantee financial support. To hedge against is to protect against. So we need to hedge against financial loss, would mean to protect against financial loss. An audit, a lot of you are familiar with audits. It's very common that you have internal audits, external audits to review processes in your company. To forecast is to predict future. It's also a noun. To fluctuate is to go up and down, to change. To amortize and to pay off a debt. So it's actually more common in everyday speaking to say pay off. I need to pay off my debts. But amortize is used in banking circles, of course, financial circles. And to incentivize is to motivate. So we should incentivize customers to pay their debts by reducing the interest rate, for example. Some adjectives in this area that we can use are viable. It's a viable option. Lucrative. It's profitable. Marginal. Limited. Marginal profits. Fiscal, related to money. Related to government money. Monetary, related to money. Volatile, not stable, the opposite of stable. Insolvent, the opposite of solvent. If you're insolvent, you cannot pay your debts. Perhaps you go bankrupt. To be profitable, to make money. Intangible, you can't touch or measure easily. Intangible asset is something that you can't touch. A tangible asset, for example, like a house, physical. Speculative, it's can be risky. It's guesswork, you know. So those are some adjectives that you can use. Some phrasal verbs. To write something off is to accept a loss as unrecoverable. For example, I crashed my car, true story, and the car was written off because the cost of repairing the car was more than what the car was worth. Okay, so you could also use this every day, saying my car was a write-off. It was more expensive to repair than it was than the value of the car, for example. And we use it as well. For example, the day was a write-off because I was caught up doing other things that I didn't get to do the things that I wanted to do. So it was destroyed, really, you could say. But in terms of finance, to write something off is to accept as a loss. To cash in on something is to make a profit from something. So we should cash in on the low cost of Bitcoin at the moment because the prediction is that it will increase in price. To pull out of something is to withdraw from something. So to pull out of an investment is to take your money out of an investment. So the investors pulled out and the project fell apart because it had no money. Okay. To bottom out, we use when we're speaking about, for example, graphs or amounts. If something bottoms out, it reaches the bottom point, the lowest point. The opposite of that would be to peak. And to peak means it reaches a peak, it reaches the highest point. Okay? To bail out is to give financial help. This was a common expression in the last financial crisis around 2008. Europe bailed out, what was it, Italy, Spain, Ireland, and Greece. Yeah, P-I-G-S. I'm trying to think of so we received a bailout from the European community, or we were bailed out, or they bailed us out. We can use this in general terms as well. For example, if you're having a problem and someone comes to help rescue you, you can say, could you bail me out and look after my kids because I have to go to an appointment. Thanks for bailing me out. Also, in relation to crime, the phrasal verb to bail someone out means to pay the amount needed, which is called bail, to allow them to be released from prison until they are in court for the judgment. So I bailed him out for €1,000. Or bail me out, I need €1,000, for example. So it has a few different versions there. To take over means to gain control. So they took over the company. The bank took over the company when they couldn't pay their debts, for example. You can also take over responsibility, take over tasks, take over a job, assume. So when you go on holidays, I will take over your work. To run up a debt means to accumulate debt. So they ran up a lot of debts when they started up the company. And then to pay off is amortize. To pay off a debt is to finish paying a debt. Okay, so some financial vocabulary. Moving on to travel and adventure. For level C1 and C2, it serves for both. Some verbs that we can use on this topic include to embark on an adventure is to begin an adventure. To venture means to do something that's a little bit brave, risky, unknown. They ventured into the jungle. To navigate is to find your way. To trek is to walk long distances. So for example, here in Alicante, you can go trekking every weekend because there are a lot of nice long walks, mountain walks that you can do, usually in nature. To explore, to see around you, investigate around you. To soar means to rise high in the air. For example, the bird soared into the air. We can also use figuratively, prices soared during the crisis. They increased very quickly. And then the opposite would be to plunge, to drop. So the bird plunged into the sea to catch a fish. The prices plunged after the crisis, for example. Meander is a verb that means to wander without a specific destination or aim, without a clear direction. So, for example, the river meanders through the countryside. It doesn't go straight, it goes like this, We meandered for about an hour because we weren't in a hurry and we didn't have anywhere to be. You can also use the verb to wander, similar, We wandered around for an hour. We meandered for an hour. Some more phrasal verbs. To set off is to begin your journey. We set off at 2:00. To check into a hotel, to check out of a hotel. To get away, to escape for a few days. So I need to get away and have a break. To look around is to have a look, to investigate a little, explore. Head for, we use the word head as a verb to mean to go. And we use a lot, actually. I'm heading for home. I'm going home. I'm heading to the shop. Do you want anything? I'm going to head now means I'm going to leave now. Where are you headed for? Where are you going? So we use it a lot. It's a nice one to use to sound a little bit more colloquial in your English. To get around means to move from place to place. So how are you getting around when you go on holiday? We're going to hire a car. If you say to someone you get around, it means you travel a lot. Stopover means escala. Layover is more common in the US. So the verb to stop over, phrasal verb, means to stop somewhere on the way to somewhere else. So on the way to Madrid, we stopped over in Albacete for lunch. Or on the way to Chicago, I have a stopover in London. Or a layover in London. Take off in relation to travel is when the plane leaves the ground. The opposite is to land. To run into someone is to meet someone unexpectedly. So I ran into an old friend on the street yesterday. To check out, as well as meaning to leave a hotel, can be to examine or investigate something. Check out my new phone. It has a lot of new features. Okay, so some adjectives in relation to describing or traveling. Picturesque. So, for example, Ireland is very picturesque because it's very green, because it rains a lot. The scenery is breathtaking, absolutely beautiful. It has a very rugged landscape, wild, and, it's not very cuadrado. It's not, it's wild. A wild landscape, a rugged landscape. Not even, it's not flat. It's up and down and wild. Untouched, so the inner Amazon remains untouched for the moment. No one usually goes there unspoiled. It's a remote location. It's very far away. It's a thrilling experience, very exciting. Unpredictable. You cannot forecast what's going to happen. Challenging is another way to say difficult. It's a challenging situation, a difficult situation. I have a challenge at work means I have a problem at work. It's an immersive experience. You're fully involved in this experience. For example, going for a dive is an immersive experience because you're 100% focused on being safe under the water and seeing what's around you under the water. To go off the beaten track, or I like off the beaten track locations, means that I like to be in more remote, untouched locations that no one else usually has been, or it's not a very touristy place. So, a couple of expressions here. Live life to the fullest. To embrace adventure. To get your bearings means to figure out where you are and which direction you're going, Okay, so let me get my bearings. We're here and we need to get here, so we need to follow this direction, this path. Step out of your comfort zone, always good advice to do something different. To hit the road, we also use in meaning to go. Okay, I'm going to go. I'm going to hit the road. I'm going to head. So we can say those in different ways. Famous song, Hit the Road Jack. Check it out. To take the scenic route means to choose a longer but more beautiful way of going. We say this sarcastically sometimes when we get lost. Oh, we took the scenic route. But it means to take a longer, more beautiful route. And finally, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. So just start doing it. You could apply it to your English, for example. Start studying today, and if you do it consistently and constantly, you will improve. So that is it for vocabulary for travel and adventure. If you want to review some connectors, some linkers for speaking about traveling or writing about traveling, here they are. As soon as we arrive, we went to the beach. Provided that, or providing, or as long as well. Siempre que. Provided that the weather is good, we can go trekking. Providing the weather is good, we can go trekking. Provided that the weather is good, without that, or as long as the weather is good, we can go trekking. In case I think you know, even though, although, or though. Okay. Not only, but also, It's useful, but be careful because it's an inversion. Not only do I like traveling, but I also like staying in nice hotels, for example. So that, or in order that. We planned the route carefully so that we wouldn't get lost. In order that we wouldn't get lost. Or in order to not get lost. Unless, al menos que, we won't start the climb unless the guide says that it's safe. So, useful to know. Or unless the weather is bad, we plan to start tomorrow. As long as we mentioned before, the same as provided that. Siempre que. While and whereas. So, they can mean the same thing, mientras. While the city was crowded, the countryside felt peaceful. Whereas the city was crowded, the countryside felt peaceful. And then while can also be at the same time. While you tidy up, I will do the dishes, for example. And then finally, therefore or thus. Thus you may not have heard so often. It's a more formal way, maybe, of saying therefore. The trail was closed due to landslides, therefore we had to change plans. Thus we had to change plans. It's the same. Por lo tanto. Okay, and there's some tips there if you're going to do the exam. So, moving on to our next topic. This is specifically for C2. Again, if you're C1, you want to review it, you can. Some rhetorical devices that we use in speech. This is quite technical. It's really not important if you know the name of the techniques here. Just that you would be familiar with the structures. So maybe just, to check the examples here. Using repetition to emphasize, we will fight for justice, we will fight for freedom, we will fight for our children, So if you're interested, for example, in public speaking, these could be good structures. Using repetition again, see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. Using alliteration, boldly, bravely, and brilliantly. Using rhetorical questions, you don't really need the answer. Who among us would not want a better future? Hyperbole, exaggerating. I've told you a million times, not literally. Antithesis, contrasting ideas. So, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. That's quite a famous expression. Can't remember the speaker. The rule of three, grouping three ideas together. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Life is a journey, full of unexpected turns, so using more figurative language. Using emotion. Imagine the faces of the children who have nothing. And using ethos. As someone who has worked in healthcare for 20 years, I can safely say that, for example. Now, let's move on to some phrasal verbs with come. Some of these you're going to know, maybe one or two that you're familiar with or you're not sure of, so we will just review them. Come in means to enter, so someone knocks on the door, come in. Come out means to appear or be published. The book comes out next week. We also use this as an expression for someone who tells other people that they are gay. Come out of the closet. He came out last week. We were surprised we didn't know. For example, to come back means to return. That's all. I went on the trip on Monday. I came back on Tuesday. To come up and to come up with, do not confuse. They have different meanings. Don't you love phrasal verbs? So the first one, to come up, means to be mentioned or to appear in a conversation. The topic came up in the meeting. So it just kind of comes up naturally in a meeting. Come up with means to think of or to suggest a topic. So she came up with an idea. We need to come up with some strategies. We have to come up with some suggestions. Can anybody come up with a plan? We can use it like this, okay? It's more intentional. So come up and come up with. Then in the middle here, we have to come across, is to find by chance, by accident almost, I came across an old photo. I came across a great little garden in the middle of the city. To find by chance. And then finally, we have to come over, and it just means to visit someone at home. Do you want to come over later for dinner, for example? So here you have a little quiz to practice the phrasal verbs with come. Now, phrasal verbs with get. Some of these, again, you will know, and some of those might be new, so let's check them. Get up in the morning, or get up from your chair. To get on, or get along, you can also say. Get along is more US English. I get on well with my neighbors. I get on with my neighbors. It's the same. And then the negative would be I don't get on with. I don't have a good relationship with my neighbors, for example. We get on well. To get off is to leave a vehicle, public transport, to get off the train. And to get off work means to finish work. To get out of would be to leave a car or a taxi. To get out of a car, get out of a taxi, get out of a lift as well. The opposite is get on the train, get into the car, get into the taxi, get into the lift. So we use get on, get off for public transport. To get over something is to recover from a physical illness or an emotional upset. I get over a cold in 2 days. It took a long time to get over COVID. It's difficult to get over a broken heart or the death of a loved one. To get back is to return. I left on Monday, I got back on Tuesday. Get along we mentioned, the same as get on. To get rid of something or someone, deshacerse de. I need to get rid of some old clothes, or we should get rid of her. She doesn't work very well for the company. So, get rid of, remove or throw away. A little quiz here, you can check the phrasal verbs for yourself. Okay, moving on to the language of persuasion and negotiation. This is level C2, but you might find if you're level C1 some expressions that could be useful, for example, in your work, especially if you need to negotiate some situations. Okay, I really appreciate, very polite. So this would be, to improve relationships, to open up dialogue maybe. Before we get started, I'd love to hear your thoughts. It's great we have the chance to explore this together. We can outline what we both hope to achieve. And let's make sure we're on the same page before we move forward. Yeah, clarifying expectations, managing expectations, super important. Okay, so if you want to present ideas or proposals, our main objective is, what we're proposing is the following. This approach will allow us to do something, or it would allow us to do something. One of the key advantages of this plan is to, for example, and to put this into perspective, let's imagine that, for example. Okay, so they're good starter phrases. Oops. When you're trying to persuade or influence someone's decision, some expressions, I understand your concern, but consider this. You'll find that the solution aligns with your priorities, so you're trying to match your goals. What makes this particularly effective is, I think we can both agree, you're building common ground here. If you look at the long-term benefits, it's clear that. So to be positive. It's not just cost effective, but it's also strategically sound. So you might need to practice that one a few times. And finally, this option would give you far more flexibility. So you're giving the benefits. Okay. When you're negotiating or counter proposing something, you could say, would you be open to considering, or would you be open to the possibility of, how about we explore a middle ground? If we could guarantee this, would you be able to, or would you be willing to do this? That might be difficult for us unless, so you're resisting, but you're trying to work with them. From our side, we need some flexibility on, I see where you're coming from, but our concern is, or the problem is, let's weigh up the pros and cons. Let's look at the advantages and disadvantages. Okay, so trying to reach an agreement then, or trying to close, reach a compromise. So to summarize what we have agreed on, you want to clarify. I think we've reached a solution that works for both sides. It sounds like a win-win situation. We can finalize the details once we confirm timelines, and it's been a pleasure working this out with you. Okay. More vocabulary could be a concession. So to give a concession, to concede something, is something you give to reach agreement, to reach a compromise. A compromise is when you give something and the other party gives something in order to reach an agreement. This is a compromise. Different from a commitment. Be careful. A commitment is when you promise to do something. For example, when I signed my contract for work, I made a commitment to carry out the duties of the post. Or commitment to the client is to have the work finished by the deadline. Something you promise to do. A compromise is you give something, they give something to reach an agreement. Okay? Leverage, to use something as leverage or to leverage. It's a noun and a verb. Is to use something to your advantage. If you have some advantage, that you can use it in a negotiation. To compromise, we mentioned before. To find a middle ground. A stalemate is when you cannot progress because you cannot move beyond something. Something is making you stuck. You're blocked. You cannot move forward. You have reached a stalemate. You are at a stalemate. Bargaining power is what you have when you have leverage. If you have something that allows you to negotiate better conditions, you have bargaining power, you have leverage. To bargain is to negotiate. To do your due diligence is to analyze carefully before you take decisions. To make a trade-off is to make a balance between two options. You know, you can use this in compromising as well. An alignment, to align your ideas, to agree, the compatibility. Something that is mutually beneficial. It has a mutual benefit. Both parties have a benefit, win-win situation. And contingency is possible future condition or risk. So it's a good idea to have a contingency plan. So if something happens, or if there is a risk in the future, that you have a plan of what to do. So again, with C2 vocabulary, if you want to use more persuasive language techniques, you can appeal to their logic, you know, by giving science-based evidence, for example. Appeal to the emotions. Your team deserves a solution. Appeal to the credibility based on our experience with other clients. Using contrast, rather than doing this, let's look at this. Using rhetorical questions, who wouldn't want a more efficient system? And then using concessive linking, although it requires an investment, the payoff is substantial. So I hope you find some of those expressions and vocabulary useful when you're negotiating. Okay, let's move on to legal vocabulary. So when you're speaking about some legal concepts, maybe in your job, maybe for exams, or maybe just for conversation, here's some vocabulary that could be useful. So here we have some legal terminology and their definition. The jurisdiction, the area that you can work in relation to authorities, legislation, set of laws, statutory, required by law, case law, is the law established through decisions made by the courts. Precedent, has happened before, a legal decision made before. Litigation, the process of taking legal action or going to court. Liability, the legal responsibility that you have. Due process is to have a fair treatment in the legal system. Enforcement means the implementation of the law or regulations. To appeal a decision is to request that a higher court checks the decision of the court. An indictment is a formal charge or accusation. A testimony is a statement or evidence that you give under oath in the court. So the witness gave their testimony, for example. And a settlement is to reach an agreement before the full trial or out of court. Arbitration is legally binding resolution outside of the court. To comply with or compliance is to comply with the law, comply with the regulations or standards. To be in breach means that you are not complying the rule or the contract or the law. You are not in compliance with the law. An infringement means a violation of the law or the standard or the regulation. You're not fully complying with it. A clause means a specific provision or condition inside a contract. If it's binding, legally binding means that you can be legally made to comply, or it's obligatory. And an acquittal means that someone is not guilty. So some phrases that we use in terms of law. To enforce the law is to make sure it happens. So the police try to enforce the law. To pass legislation is to make put something into law. To file a lawsuit means to sue, to demand that. To uphold a ruling means to maintain a previous decision by law. To grant immunity means that you are immune from charges. For example, witnesses were granted immunity in exchange for testimony. To violate a clause means not to comply. To appeal a verdict, we mentioned before, is to go to a higher court to appeal the decision of a lower court. To reach a settlement means to reach an agreement before you go to court. So those are just built on the vocabulary that we did before. In relation to vocabulary of politics, here are some terms that sometimes can be related to legal as well, but we'll treat them differently. So in speaking of the government and their institutions, some terms could be the Constitution, separation of powers, you can check the meanings here, the checks and balances. A bill is a proposed law that hasn't been put into effect yet. A decree, an executive order, a referendum, a coalition. If you're only listening to this and you're not watching the video or you're not watching the PDF, just come back and check it on page 34 for the meanings, okay? Coalition, incumbent, lobbying, constituency, mandate, policy making, opposition, bureaucracy, sovereignty, diplomatic relations, sanctions, treaty or accord or convention, and to ratify, the verb to ratify. So some expressions that we have in relation to politics. To pass a bill means to make it into law. To form a coalition is that some parties get together to form a group of parties as a single entity. Used a lot to get majority rule. To implement a policy is to put a policy into effect, is to make it happen, implement. To hold a referendum is to ask the people for their opinion in order to make a decision. To impose sanctions is to, for example, they impose sanctions on the country because they wouldn't comply with the law. So there were some limits to what they could do. To dissolve parliament is to say that the parliament they have at the moment is null and void. It's not legal. To win by a narrow margin means that you won by very little, very few votes. For example, 51% to 49% is a narrow margin. And restore diplomatic ties. Okay. Some more expressions in relation to politics and law. that you could use when you're speaking. From a constitutional standpoint, from a political standpoint, from a point of view. The ruling sets a precedent. It raises serious questions about accountability. The motion was passed with a clear majority into law. Undermines civil liberties is to make them less, to reduce the strength of civil liberties. To undermine is to reduce strength. Or for example, if you undermine my opinion, you are saying that it's not so valid. So I could say to someone, you undermined my opinion because you said something that made my opinion not so valid or believable. It's a matter of national sovereignty. Transparency must be at the heart of governance, central to governance. Checks and balances are essential to democracy. And they call for, so the opposition is calling for, they are asking for greater oversight. And in legal terms, the interpretation remains contested. It is not agreed. Okay, so some advanced ways of speaking there in relation to politics and law. Some expressions in relation to this as well. For example, to toe the party line means to always agree with what the party say. In the public eye means to be in public. A political hot potato. So a hot potato is something that, it's controversial, it's sensitive, it's difficult. For example, if you have a hot potato in work, you have a problem. And people try to pass it from one to the other because it's hot. So a political hot potato, controversial. Behind closed doors, in secret. To bend the rules means to not strictly adhere to the law. To be above the law means the law doesn't apply to you. You're, for example, too important, or you're a dictator. So we say you're not above the law. The law also applies to you. Red tape is a lot of paperwork, bureaucracy. To be in a power vacuum is not to have a clear leadership. To run for office means to put yourself forward, to present yourself as a candidate. And the rule of law means the law says. So, moving on to the topic of climate change. Before we talked about the environment, here are some more expressions and vocabulary that we can use if we are speaking about climate change. Some of these can be used for all types of debates. So if you, for example, you need to debate a lot, or you want to do the C1, C2 exam, some of these expressions will be very useful, okay? So let's quickly review these expressions from my point of view, in my opinion. But don't say in my opinion, it's too easy. From my point of view, it's undeniable that, you cannot say that it's not true. The evidence shows that, given evidence and science-based. A possible solution. Governments should take action too. So on one hand, on the other hand, two separate, two contrasting positions. We can't ignore the fact. Personally, I believe. What worries me most is, and would you agree that? And continue with your statement. If you want to summarize into simpler forms or into smaller, these are some useful expressions. To sum up. In other words, the main idea, essentially, the key point, what it comes down to is, or what it boils down to is. To put it simply, to put it another way, let me highlight, in summary and overall. So those are good for debates or presentations in general. Okay, so try to remember some of those. In relation to storytelling, which is often one of the most difficult things of a language, you have some structures here. Most of them we have reviewed before, so I'm not going to go into them here, but if you want to, you can come to the accompanying PDF on page 40 and review them. Okay, so we spoke up before about structures of modal verbs, adverbs, phrases, some other speculative phrases. So you can review all of these here in order to enrich your speaking or your writing. Okay. At the bottom of the document, we have some Cambridge resources that you can use if you're going to do the Cambridge exam. So let me just move to the final pages. So you can see here that we have some resources to practice different areas of the Cambridge exam in both C1 and C2. So every month we're focusing on different areas. If you're even not doing the Cambridge exam, it's a good idea to review these to practice the different areas of your English as well if you want to study a little bit more. And then finally, we have some extra links to practice some of the concepts that we saw here further as well. So just keep reviewing this vocabulary. You can review it a couple of times, especially if I've been speaking quite fast or my accent is quite strong, or you want to try to remember it. You can watch this as many times as you like. Until next